All right. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for attending the August 17, 2021 Operations Committee meeting. We have a very packed agenda this morning, so I ask that my fellow board colleagues, Commissioner Bondima for now, save your questions and remarks to the end of the respective presentations. And for today's presenters, please try to stick as close to your presentation allotted times, just so we can end at our extended end time at 12:30. And if everyone's okay with that, we can get started with our first presentation, which is the comprehensive maintenance plan. Who do we have the pleasure of speaking with this morning?
Hi, good morning. This is Monique Rumo. I'm the acting executive director for operations. We're actually going in the reverse order. It should we're going to present our school readiness plan first, and then we're going to do the CMP, because there's some information in that one that we did not put in the CMP.
Okay, so we're going to get started with the school readiness plan first.
Yes, please.
Okay.
All right. And I'm handing that over to Latasha Moretti.
Hello, how are you? We can't hear you, you're muted.
I'm sorry. Good morning, Chair Robertson. Good morning, Commissioner Bondima.
Morning.
And everyone who's on the call. I'm going to present the school readiness presentation this morning. And also I'm accompanied by Robin Marshall, our Assistant Director of Transportation, and he'll go through the transportation parts of the presentation. So let me share my screen. They said Joe's not here today, so let me share my screen and we'll get started. Can everybody see the screen?
Yes.
Okay. Good morning. As I said, I'll go through the school readiness presentation. And of course, this presentation just goes through the activities that operations performs annually to get ready for our students and staff and families to return. Similar to last year, I'll go through the key departments that perform the heavy lift, as well as speak to some of the recovery planning activities in response to COVID-19. So the departments, let's think about, when you think about who does the heavy lift for our school readiness activities, you can start with our facilities design and construction team. So this team is led by Cindy Smith and is comprised of all our architects, our engineers, and our project managers who have oversight over all our construction renovation projects. So these projects include anything from our capital improvement projects, our HVAC and AC projects, and it's important to note that this is also the team that worked on our AC plan. So if you remember, about 5 years ago, 75 of our schools did not have air conditioning, and now we're down to 23. So we're very proud of that work, and 10 are under construction right now. This team also works on our window installation projects and also our partnering projects, if you will. Those are the projects that we work on with Heart of America and Weinberg. Some are familiar with the Weinberg libraries. So we'll go to our facility maintenance and operations team. This team is led by Blaine Lipsky, and this is the team that ensures that our buildings are healthy, safe, and of course, clean and ready to receive our students. So this team operates on a blitz schedule. So our team goes in and does a pre-blitz, then they go in and actually perform the maintenance repairs. And then after the blitz, we also do a post-inspection, which we'll speak to later on in the presentation. Also under maintenance and operations, you have our environmental compliance team. And this team also is comprised of the team that provides support to schools for custodial. So this team developed guidance. This team also developed checklists to ensure that schools had the proper custodial support and training that they needed to start the school year. And underneath this is also our pest control team, and our pest control team works hard to ensure that we don't have rodents. We all know that we're in an urban environment, so pest control did something unique this year where they prioritized those schools that had historical problems, and we wanted to make sure that we put an emphasis on those schools. And finally, our transportation team, I mentioned my colleague, Robin Marshall, will also be presenting, but the director of that department is Jacinta Hughes. And of course, this is the team that ensures ensures that all students who are eligible for transportation receive transportation at the start of school. They work hard to route all of our students prior to the start of school. And also, Mr. Marshall is going to speak a little bit about the heavy lift that we did this year on bell schedule changes on a later slide. So our school readiness and our focus areas, I'm not going to read all our focus areas and our goals to you, but I do want to bring to the forefront how we're trying to be more customer service driven in our work. We're being very intentional about the way we approach our work so that we can deliver quality service. And as you can see, these are all our goals, but somebody once said that quality is everyone's responsibility. So we're just trying to make sure that as we provide services to our schools, that we work with our school leaders and we work with our schools and keep in constant communication to ensure that they're satisfied with the work that we're performing. This slide speaks volumes, at least it does to me, because this small team of 14 people on our design and construction team, as you can see, they have over 39 projects, HVAC and AC projects that are somewhere in the process, and over 83 other capital projects that they're working on. So this small team does a heavy lift and amount of work each year, so we're really proud of this team as well. And so these are just in greater detail some of the school readiness activities that our teams perform. I'm not going to read each of them. I'll highlight one or two. Like I said, for building maintenance, we're being very intentional about ensuring quality of service. So our post-blitz inspection is just where after we go through and perform the blitz and our teams perform the blitz, we evaluate the quality of work that we actually did and communicate to school leaders on to ensure that they are satisfied with the work. Our mechanical services team, this is the team that did the lift with the MERV 13 filters and worked on air quality. They also installed air purifiers in our buildings. And then for custodial support, as we mentioned, our custodial support team, they provided guidance, they provided training. And I do want to emphasize that the heart of this presentation and the meat of this presentation is in the appendix. So in the appendix, you'll see our custodial guidance. You'll also see our checklist that were developed for custodial support. You'll see the entire list of capital projects that we're working on. And you'll also see the process for beautification. And I just want to point out for environmental compliance that our pest control team falls under environmental compliance, and they're continuing to monitor activities. I also want to point out that even though I pointed out that we prioritize those buildings that had rodent issues and historically prevalent rodent issues, that doesn't mean that the other schools are not getting their monthly inspection that they also get in their non-invasive treatments. And I'll turn it over to Robin Marshall, who's going to speak a little bit about transportation and the heavy lift we did to change bell schedules this year.
Thank you, Latasha, and good morning to you all, Commissioner Roberts, Commissioner Bondima, and any other commissioner that's on that I can't see. So I'm going to start with bell schedules. So Latasha mentioned the heavy lift that we went through with bell schedules this year. It was extremely heavy, but we do look forward to what opportunities they may bring for this upcoming school year to transport students more effectively, especially with a anticipated driver shortage that we will face this school year. So the bell schedules have been finalized. They are complete. The city schools website has been updated to reflect what those bell times are. The customer service aspect behind bell schedules was to proactively respond to the anticipated driver shortage that is going on nationwide. That's going to affect us locally here as well. The overall goal is to balance the number of buses needed at various time periods throughout the day. So for those who are not familiar with how our bell times were set up, we transported almost 80% of all of our students within a small 30-minute window. So between 7:45 and 8:15, the Office of Pupil Transportation was responsible to getting 80% of our yellow bus population to school. So with the bell time changes, that number looks a lot more even throughout the morning time period, the early morning time period, and the late morning time periods throughout the day. Changes were made to approximately 50% of the start times from SY 2019-2020 to this upcoming school year as well. The initial proposal proposed a lot more changes, but after communicating with schools, going back and forward with, what those impacts are, we did we did revert some of those changes to match what was going on in 2019 and 2020. So I'm gonna go to the student information portion of this slide. So we are currently in the midst of routing students for this upcoming school year, but what the ask was from school leaders was for their students who rolled over from last year to be completed in STS, which is our student transportation system, by July the 16th. From there, we started a data verification and quality assurance process to vet the addresses that was submitted, make changes to any addresses that may have been either formatted wrong or just typed in completely incorrectly. That process happened between August 2nd and the 13th. The routing process was also supposed to start in that same week. However, since we didn't um, finalize the bell times until the middle of last week, the routing process started towards the end of last week. So our initial goal was to get routes distributed to schools by this past Friday and start going out to families this week. But since the bells were just finalized middle of last week, we are currently still in that routing process. And the new anticipated date is this upcoming Monday to start sending those routes out, which pushes the communication start date back, but the communication end date, which is the 27th, will still remain the same. Um, and route adjustments, the final route adjustments will happen on August the 25th. So any feedback from our drivers that do their dry runs, like if we end up routing a student to a abandoned building because maybe the address was wrong, they'll let us know, and then we'll go back to the school to say we need you to identify a new address for this family because the one that was entered in the system was wrong. So we do adjustments like that throughout this process. We'll stop route adjustments on the 25th and then get contractors geared up for schools to start on August the 30th, which I know everybody's excited about. There's, man, anxiety around it, excitement, a lot. So I'm all of those emotions are going through me as well. So I'm just looking forward to a successful start of school, which I'm anticipating is going to be challenging, but we're here ready to fight for our students.
Thanks, Robin. And so I'm going to speak a little bit about the health and safety guidance. So Sharika Bolden on our team has worked with others to do a phenomenal job of ensuring that all our health and safety measures are updated. So in our health and safety guide, so this month we actually put some new updates, and we updated the requirement around the removal of face requirements, face coverings while outdoors. We added some guidelines for adult eating when adults eat together. Also, this month we rolled out the requirement to have students face the same direction in the classroom. That was removed. And we also updated the guidelines around building and field use for permits. Since the start of COVID, we also have had an ongoing centralized ordering process and system that operations oversees. And so this slide just shows what items we will continue to provide, which are our air filters, the MERV 13 filters, and our face coverings for all our students and staff as they return. Mr. Marshall, I'm turning it back over to you for the updates that transportation has made in regards to COVID in response to COVID-19.
Absolutely. So the guidelines that transportation will follow, all students and staff will be required to wear face masks and face shields. I'm sorry, face masks or face shields The face shields are optional for bus staff, but if they request, we will provide those shields to the staff. So training for students and staff on the importance of health and safety practices when commuting is something that has and will be taking place. Regular cleaning protocols will happen. So in between schools, the bus drivers and bus aides will do a wipe down of the high touch areas, and then at the end of every school day, there's a more thorough cleaning that happens to the bus. Um, and I'm sorry, the bottom right. So we were transporting one student per seat with every other seat skipped. However, we are seating no more than two per seat when space is not permitted. So for our curb to curb routes, we can seat one per seat still, because we have a smaller number of students on those routes, but our swing space and corner to corner routes where we may pick up as many as 30, 40, and sometimes 50 students, we will say seat two per seat on those routes where space is not permitted to seat one per seat. And seats will be offered, of course, first to students with special needs or medically fragile, and then we will route the other transportation reasons from that point accordingly.
Thanks, Robin. So it's important to note that during this time, we also had to develop special guidance for all of our external agencies and all of the requests that we get for our facilities in our fields. And of course, these are just some of the components that are in the guidance listed on this slide. And so we thought it was important to include the process for how people secure permits. Of course, people can apply. We're excited because we had the online paper form forever, we still do, but now we also rolled out an electronic process, which I'll speak to on the next slide. But of course, applicants apply for use of our buildings or our fields. It's reviewed first at the school level, and the principal approves or disapproves the request. And then once it's approved at the school level, then it comes to our real estate manager, Mr. Greg Gamble, for confirmation. He assesses the fees and also ensures that each permit user has a liability, a certificate of liability and insurance. And then of course they hold their event. So we're excited. So as technology continues to expand, we're excited that in January of 2020, right before COVID, we implemented an electronic process. So of course, the electronic system tracks where all the permits are in the status of each permit. It sends a direct email notification to the principals whether they can approve or deny the permit in the system. It also alerts the applicant of their status of the permit, even if it's denied, and the reasons for it to be denied. That's the end of our presentation, but I do want to point out that this appendix is full of a plethora of information. Like I said, it includes all our capital projects that we have going on right now. It includes the custodial guidance. It includes the checklist. It also includes the process for beautification. So please check out the appendix, because that really is where the heart of this presentation is.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Moretti and Mr. Marshall, for your presentations. I'm going to open up the floor to my colleagues first for questions and remarks. I saw your hand first, Commissioner Reed.
Hey, thank you, Lady Chantel. First, I'd like to thank Dr. Washington. Dr. Washington, I don't see your face, but I know you're here. I really appreciate the way you enable and embolden your team to make presentations. It says one thing, it says that you're trying to build in terms of enlargement of your group, engagement of your group, but also shows that your ego says, hey, I can let them do it. I already know it, and they can learn. So good move, and that's a good visionary move. I guess the other thing I think of, Vernon Reed looks at all this stuff as being dead on arrival. By dead on arrival, I'm saying all the plan we have in terms of the 3 R's and the readiness plan, it has no visionary element in terms of how we're approaching the Delta variant. And my approach is the Delta variant is geometrically more scary than the Alpha variant. Therefore, is there a plan B that we use for transportation, facilities, spacing, and mask if the Delta variant proves to be what it looks like it's going to be? I don't know if the question made sense or not, but at the end of the day, the Delta variant is a pretty scary thing, and nobody talks about how that changes the dynamic in terms of what we're going to do going forward.
Yeah, and so I think that one of the things that I will say is, thank you for the question. I think that there's also a part of our health and safety protocol that goes beyond facilities. And it's a lot of the work that's going on around some of the testing that is happening. And I think that this presentation does not speak in detail around a lot of the testing and the screening that's coming out of the Chief of Staff's office. And I think that that is another very important layer on top of all of the other mitigating factors that we're doing with buildings and also on buses. So as we're testing students in order to provide support for students that are positive and some of those different things like that with the COVID virus, I think that that is something that is another layer of support that we, I think that there is another follow-up presentation in general that is going to also present some of that health and safety protocols that's going to talk a little bit more to that. But in terms of plan B, if other things happen, again, I think that as a district technology, all of those conversations are happening about what happens if this is, the virus is elevated and there are additional things that are happening that we can't, you know, if schools have to shut down or all of those different things like that. I think there are other conversations that are happening outside of just facilities, and that the district is preparing that presentation to talk a little bit more comprehensively about it. But I think this presentation is more so around how we're readying our facilities and how we're readying transportation for the start of school.
Thank you.
Okay.
Commissioner Readiness.
Good morning, everybody. I have several questions, but in the interest of time, I'm going to try to make it extremely as short as possible. Some of my questions are really important. The first question I have, we talk about school maintenance. It is really clear when we talk about biotech and we talk about microorganisms, one of the most important areas that we must address is maintenance in the bathrooms. And regardless of what we do and how often we do it, there is a possibility that issues about the virus will occur right in that bathroom. And I would like to know, and this is a hard thing to do, and please, I understand it will be, if you periodically have the custodians mark, like they do anywhere else, and I'm sure, sheets or showing how often they have reviewed those bathrooms, because there's been some incidents during the summer at some of our big high schools during summer school where the bathrooms had some problems. So how are you addressing that? Because if we talk about spreading viruses, that's one of the #1 places it'll go. That's my first question. I'll ask all the questions at the same and right behind each other. Are we putting air filters in each classroom? That's the other question. And also, when students are on the bus, you did say the buses seats are wiped down. Those seats are wiped down after after you deliver the children, before they pick up another group of children. Will you be wiping down each seat? Because that's important. And then we might at some point, because this virus has accelerated, whether we know it or not, and we have moved ahead. It would be nice if the students carry in their book bag wipes, because even though we wipe down, it would be nice if we train our kids that before you sit down, wipe the seat again, because that's important, because sometimes we miss spots. We know it, they do it in the hospitals, everywhere. So it's not our fault, but it's something that we have to be have to pay a lot of attention to. And the other question, and you might have talked about this already, have we gotten to the point that we're off of the bottled water? Are we using all our fountains in all 70 some schools? What's the story on the water?
Okay.
Okay.
So Commissioner, no, those are all very good questions, and I'm trying to remember them. So I'm gonna ask Latasha to help me to remember them. So the first question you asked was about bathrooms, what we're doing to bathrooms.
Right.
And so I will say that over the summer and even during the time that our buildings were shut out, there was a significant amount of investments that were put into bathrooms, particularly fixing exhaust fans in bathrooms, because that's where your ventilation issues happen. Right. And then the second piece around bathrooms is that we have a district-wide guidance that we give to all schools that custodians have this checklist. The checklist is available in the appendix of the presentation. It's also available on the website. And so there's a checklist that the custodian goes through, and they actually have to sign their name every time they've gone in and done the frequent cleaning. It should be posted on the door, the front or the back part of the bathroom door. Okay. So if you are a visitor and you come in, that inspection sheet should be posted to let you know that somebody has come in and they've cleaned it and how frequent they've cleaned it, with a signature giving, it's about accountability to make sure they've done it. Whenever there are schools where incidents where there are incidents and different things like that, we as operations team, we ask that we be alerted about it. We have a manager of custodian liaison whose name is Quentin Woods. A lot of times Quentin will go to that school site and he will consult the school administrator and also the custodian in regards to the cleaning or whatever incident has been highlighted. So that's to address the bathroom question. Asha, I'm asking you to help me with the next question.
Not a problem. There was a question also about our bottled water.
Mm-hmm. So bottled water, we have a few schools, and mostly our new and renovated schools is where they're using fountains because they're new and renovated. We for all other schools, they're still using bottled water until there is an extensive renovation that's done to address all of the pipes and everything else that would make sure that there's no lead in the water. So I think that we have, I can't recall off the top of my head the number of schools, but I can give you a follow-up on the number and the list of schools. Most of them are going to be 21st century schools, and some of the schools with new renovations done under our capital program.
Okay, thank you. And the air filters in the classroom, and also, what did I say about wiping the seats? That's a quickie.
Yeah, and so the air filters in the classroom, all of our buildings were assessed to make a determination if they would receive MERV 13 filters. So if a MERV 13 filter is in the building, it's supporting the classroom space. Or if they were too old of the building and they could not receive MERV 13 filters, they received air purifiers, and that air purifier will support every one of those classroom spaces. So if it's a building that's receiving MERV 13, then the MERV 13s are in the building and they're supporting classrooms. But if it's a building that does not support MERV 13s, there's an air purifier that is sitting in that classroom space that's supporting the classroom, maybe 1 or 2 air purifiers based off the square footage of that classroom.
Okay. Thank you.
And then the last one was about the wipe down of buses. And so that one, I'm going to ask Robin or Jacinta if you guys can chime in and kind of help me talk about how we're cleaning buses.
Absolutely. So in between schools, the high touch points that students are most likely to touch, like the seats, the rails, things of that nature, the walls, will be wiped down in between schools in the middle of the day. But at the end of the route, that's when a more thorough cleaning happens, from like they spray the bus down and wipe it down thoroughly.
Okay, thank you for the answer. But one thing I would like to recommend, and you can do it, I highly recommend, is being done in other places. It wouldn't cost us much money, is to have the kids have little wipes inside of their book bag, so they can learn to keep their area clean as well. It's a wonderful habit, but it doesn't cost that much money to buy wipes for each kid to carry in their backpack. Some parents already give it to them, but it would be nice if we did that as well. But thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so for the sake of saving time, I do have two follow-up questions. One of which is, I believe the last time that you all came to the committee, Mr. Marshall, I couldn't see your last name. There was discussion around doing the bell schedule study. And so I see that it's been embedded as a part of, there has been some changes for the upcoming school year, and that I have received some feedback from families that they were not particularly in the know. So my one question is, how are families being informed about the changes to their bell schedules at their schools? And then also the board, could we have information around the bell study that was done?
Absolutely. So for the last question, you can definitely have the information around the new bell times. But as far as how the engagement happened during the process, we first communicated with the CLNs, the CLN leaders, told them what the recommended bell times were. The CLN leaders then went to their principals and their school leaders to pass that info on to them and collect any feedback, pushback, or whatever you want to call it from them to bring back to us. The school leaders also, surveyed some of their families to see what works best for families as well. They brought that info back to their school manager as well as the ILED. From then, they then brought that info back to transportation. We looked at it holistically. A lot of requests we were able to honor, which is why I said earlier we recommended a lot more changes to the bell times, and then we came down and settled at a 50% level. So we were able to satisfy most requests, but there were some ads that schools wanted that we just couldn't honor without kind of derailing the entire project.
And one of the things I just want to add to what Robin is speaking about is that we did not have parent engagement in the Bell study analysis. I will say that when the Bell study analysis started off, it was about efficiency, and then the pandemic happened, and we realized that we lost 30% of our driver capacity. So bus drivers did not return this year after the pandemic. Many of them found other occupations, and so with that, our engagement was more so with the school administrator and also our ILEDs and our school support managers. There was, as Robin is saying, there was a lot of almost like negotiating between schools that were in particular geographic areas with school principals about which bell schedules were more feasible and would work for them. And we took in consideration a number of different factors that Robin could definitely speak to at length around crime. We took in factors around academic performance. We took in factors around attendance and some of those different things. Now, I will say that not all schools, and Jacinta Hughes is also on the call too, as our director of transportation, not all schools got the bell time that they wanted. Because again, one of the things that Robin said is that most of our schools were being transported between a very 30-minute window. And when you have a significant drop in bus driver capacity by 30%, you can no longer transport that many schools within that window. Our buses now have to be used double. So we have to be able to pick up someone at 7:45 and be ready to pick up a next set of school within an 8 o'clock and a 9 o'clock window. And so that was also important too. And so yes, again, we would have loved to go further and engage families and the impacts of the bell times on families. But given the tight window and even the time that we're a little bit behind schedule in setting our routes, communicating our routes to families because of the engagement that we did with the school administrators, it would have been pretty difficult to be able to meet our timeline and make sure that we have buses to pick up students on time, and all of that analysis and routing was completed in time.
Thank you for that so much, Chief Washington and Mr. Marshall. I just want to continue to lift around the communications part. What I would hate is, us being maybe 2 weeks out from school starting, that there are still families that don't know about those changes. And so to the point that Commissioners Bondima and Commissioners Reed mentioned around Delta and the wonderful things that the operations team have been doing since the spring, that they've been doing since March 2020, in ensuring the wellness and safety of our students and buildings especially, it's that communications portion. And so I just want to keep that at the front of the conversation of providing that out to families in a super plain language way, so that we don't have a scenario that there's the first day of school and families don't know when schools, those updated bell schedule times. That was because I'm very well aware of the issues that you all have been facing, because you continuously kept us abreast of the challenge of bus routes, and the shortage of bus drivers. And we really appreciate that. I just wanted to keep that lifted around the family portion, since they were not a part of that bell schedule study.
And one of the things that I just do want to flag is, and I appreciate that, it is something that we make sure that we continue to pay attention to, is that we also work with our communication teams, and we provided templates and support packets for principals. But again, we have to think about ways that we as the district can also make sure that we're pushing out our communication comprehensively so that all families have access to that.
Absolutely. Good morning, Ms. Hughes. I didn't particularly need anything from you today, but thanks for joining us. And so for the sake of the schedule, and not because of your content, because you have very lovely content and updates to provide for us, but we have to transition on to the comprehensive maintenance plan. So thank you all so much for providing this update.
Thank you.
Okay, good morning again. This is Monique Rumo. I am the Acting Executive Director for Operations, and I am here to present our annual comprehensive maintenance plan. Let me go into presentation mode for you. And I'm always excited to present it because it's just an opportunity to talk about all the things that have been happening with cross maintenance, good, bad, challenges, obstacles, and just a good opportunity to fill you all in on the things that are happening inside of operations. So we have 8 things on our agenda. There are a couple of places that I'm going to spend a little bit more time on because the IAC this year rolled out some requirements for the CMP, and we not only wanted to include it in the CMP, but we wanted to make sure we highlighted the options in our presentation this year. So what you're going to see is new are our guiding principles and our strategic focus. We go in past years, we have not talked about the board investment, what we've done with that investment in terms of improvements and our strategic actions. And what is key this year is that we want to help folks understand that there is a tight relationship between maintenance and capital, and what the obstacles and things that impact those two things. So just getting right to it, the purpose of our comprehensive maintenance plan, it's about our strategic overview and what we're doing across maintenance. It is a requirement of our MOU inside the 21st Century Building Program, but it's also a requirement from the state that all LEAs submit a comprehensive maintenance plan annually. And then it's an opportunity to talk about our improvement, new initiatives, and actions we've been taking throughout the year. And so again, we wanted to talk about our guiding principles and strategic focus areas. And it's key that you all understand, and community, our principals, can see how we frame and guide the actions that we take with our facilities, whether it's in maintenance or capital. And so we have these 4 areas that guide the actions that we make. It's to improve our investment, not only in our facilities, but also in our staff. We want to leverage technology so that we can identify and address the most pressing needs that we have. We want to make evidence-based decisions. What that means is that we're not just using just data from a spreadsheet. We're using all the information around us. So it's feedback from our team. It's looking at real-time conditions. It's looking at our processes. It's doing assessments and understanding how we're allocating our resources and how our folks and teams are functioning in the field. And we take all of that information, and it's collaboration with other teams and getting their feedback. And so we take all that information so that we can make sound decisions. And then there's strategic asset management. There's asset management, but strategic asset management is becoming more popular because it's not just about the traditional financial model. I've got this system, we've put it in, all right, it's come to its end of its life cycle, now let's replace it. It's taking that financial model and it's looking at the conditions and looking at everything else that plays a part in what's happening in that building, including our budget and our staffing on how we manage this particular asset. And then there are our strategic focus areas. We didn't just pull these out of the air. What we did is there's the Association of Physical Plant Administrators. And what they do is they set guidelines for how education systems can understand and see how they are servicing or what the quality of their maintenance program is. And they have specific competencies. And the key competencies we want to focus in on, because we have control over these, are our preventive maintenance program, providing customer service, customer support and satisfaction, our service delivery and response time, and our service efficiency. I won't read the details of these because the actions that we take under each of those focus areas can change year to year, but we will keep these specific ones in place at all times because we're able to point to that. And there are metrics that the APPA gives us so that we know if we've reached this percentage with our PM program, we are at this service level in terms of maintaining our school buildings. That's just an example. So getting into the organizational structure of our facilities maintenance and operations team. So they are led by, that's a team that I currently lead, support, and advocate for. And they sit under Blaine Lipsky. He's got 3 assistant directors that support all of the maintenance work. And there are, across those 3 assistant directors, there are 8 teams that sit under them. The additional bodies of work that sit with Blaine Lipsky is logistics, but also what happened as a result of COVID. He supports with the procurement, the inventory management, and distribution of PPE and health and safety items. So this slide is just a dashboard to give you a quick oversight on some of the basic stats that we try and track in operations. So we currently manage 150 buildings, which does include unoccupied buildings, because although they're unoccupied, they're still in our portfolio, so that there is a level of maintenance that we have to sustain. We have 224 positions that sit directly under Blaine Lipsky, and this year an operating budget of 38.9 million. The 2 bar charts that you see show you our volume of work based upon work orders, and then that's the bar chart in blue, and then the one below it shows you in terms of cost, where do our costs go inside of all of our work orders. And as you can see, that 55% of our maintenance costs go toward HVAC, which is probably 90% contracted out. In terms of our work order volume and how we complete that, you'll notice plumbing. We have a lot of restrooms throughout the district, so that is a substantial amount of work. And then the 2 boxes on the right just show you our work order completion. It lets you know in terms of who is doing the work. 84% is done by our in-house staff. The remaining is done by contractors. It's probably a shock when we flip it and folks say, wow, 92% of your work order costs go to contractors. But that's because a lot of our contractor work is preventive maintenance. So our HVAC, our roofs, elevators, and our grounds, which includes grass cutting, all of that is contracted out. You've got risk management. So if there's a large flood or fire or something significant that happens, that work is performed by a contractor. And so just breaking down and helping you guys understand just in overall how we have how we spend our budget. So that 38.9 million lets you see how much is going to contracted services. These are services that play a part in the metrics and that we have to report inside of the CMP to the IAC. We've got 30% of our budget that goes to in-house personnel. We have our overall operational costs. These don't tie into any metrics that we have to report on, but they are services that we have to perform across the district. And then there are our supplies and materials that is used to support the operations in the office or in the field. And so this is a new slide. We're always looking at ways how we can help you as the board and other folks understand our budget and what we're doing with it. And so this is a 10-year budget. And so in 2014, when we started our first comprehensive maintenance plan, at that time, it was also agreed upon that the board would invest in our operations, and every year they would increase the budget around $3 million a year. And so what this is showing you, it's our funded budget from 2014 through 2022. 2023 is our projected budget. That's a key year because the additional funds that we would be given would go through 2023. So that's why this chart stops at 2023, and there's a projection there. So this next slide shows you if our budget, the operations budget, had been held harmless and we had received that additional $3 million a year, and we didn't have to reduce the budget for any reason. It shows you where the progression would be come the year 2023. And so projecting next year, we're seeing that we have about a 7.6 million gap from where we started in 2014 to where we hope we would have been by next fiscal year. So even though that gap is there, we were still given the additional funds year after year. We wanted to make sure that we made it clear on how we were investing those funds and improving our operations. So we just laid out some of our key actions here. It's not everything, but we procured and implemented School Dude, which is our computerized maintenance work order system. It's how all of our teams do and track their work in the field. We purchased technology for our teams. So instead of, we moved them away from a paper system where we're printing every morning and they're going out to the field, marking stuff in paper, coming back, and then having to transfer that into the system. They all have either iPhones or iPads where they can do that in real time. We also use the funds to complete a 4-year facility condition assessment, which resulted in a robust asset inventory. What that means is that we had all of our critical systems evaluated for condition and the anticipated expected life cycle so that we can do better forecasting and planning in terms of project prioritization. And so that was just completed last spring. And then our fourth thing is that we increased our full-time positions. One of the goals is always to reduce the amount of square footage that any one person has to have so that we can be effective. But then we also wanted to reduce our reliance on contractors for basic tasks. So for instance, we used to have contractors change out our filters throughout the year. But that cost around $1 million. But by pulling that in, we were able to save, I think, around 500K. Well, let me not say save. We were able to reallocate around 500,000 to perform more preventive maintenance and establish a team in-house that can change the filters year round. And so we've been doing that for a couple of years now. And then we've been incrementally implementing building automation. And so that was key, because given the building conditions that we had when we had the cold snap, we now at least have temperature sensors throughout all of our buildings where we can remotely see into them and say, it looks like well before folks get into the building, we can look in the system, say, hey, it looks like temperatures are off here. Let's prioritize your visit this morning, our mechanical services folks, and get them out there and hopefully resolve the issue prior to students and staff getting to the building. So we have some planned strategic actions, though. So things that we anticipate to do with our funds beyond this fiscal year. I use chess pieces because I like the visualization, and chess is about strategy. And that's one of the things that we have to do as operations. We have to be strategic with everything that we do. And so what I want to focus on are the last two pieces, which is project prioritization and then transparency and accountability, because those are closely tied. We want folks to understand what we're doing and how we prioritize our projects and how we came to that decision. But we also want to work and need to work collaboratively with our internal teams. So this year, I mean, we've gotten a number of additional funding sources to do projects that we have not been able to get to. But what we did is we worked with Office of New Initiatives to make sure that our process didn't just look at our maintenance needs. We've got an urgent thing happening over here. We need to do a capital project over here. But what are we selecting that? Let's make sure that what we're selecting aligns with our portfolio goals. So we're making sure that we continue to keep that relationship tight. So what we have not done in the past and what we have learned is that we need to help folks understand that maintenance and capital are not two separate entities that operate independently. They are, although they have two different directors in our team, they work together closely. And these next few slides are to help folks understand how closely they are related. So capital projects, all buildings, all major systems typically begin as a capital project. And from that capital project comes a building maintenance plan that we use to inform our maintenance practices over the life of that building or that system. So capital project feeds our maintenance program. And so inside of the maintenance program, we take that BMP, that maintenance plan, and we plan our routine and our preventive maintenance activities. And we track those things, but we don't just track the planned activities. We track our emergencies, major and minor repairs, replacements, and upgrades. And all of that is done inside of our school dude system, our work order system, but it's also dictated by our operating budget. So a BMP can say you need to do all of this, but we are constrained by what we can do by that operating budget. And then the final piece is then capital renewal. So it starts off as a project, we get a maintenance program, and then after we've maintained it for these number of years, it's time for capital renewal. So when a system is at the end of its life cycle, it should be presented to our capital team for capital renewal. And oftentimes a repair may be presented for capital renewal ahead of its life cycle in order to keep it working. Does someone have something? Okay, I'll keep going. And so this was the simplest way we could think on how to frame the relationship to maintenance and capital. And so the next few slides that I get into are the obstacles and the missing resources that impact that relationship. And so what you see here, it's the operating budget for our maintenance team, which is again 38.9 million, and then our operating budget for our capital team, which is 34.4 million. The CRV is going to be important when I make this next point. So the combined annual budget for those two teams is 73.3 million. So there's a facility standard that we follow that they say that a K-12 institution should look at their current replacement value of their entire portfolio, and 3% of that value should be set aside for annual maintenance budget and 4% for the capital budget. So what does that mean? City schools' current replacement value is $5 billion. That's looking at all of our buildings in the system and saying, based upon the square footage times $300, it would take $5 billion to tear down everything and put it all back down. So that means that if we look at 3% and 4%, that we require $150 million annual budget for maintenance and $200 million for our capital budget, which is a total combined annual need of $350 million based upon our entire building portfolio. The added piece inside of our capital budget, they have 4% because the standard says that 1% of that is to help decrease the backlog of maintenance that we have in our portfolio. So I said all that, but what am I saying? That city schools, we require an infusion of maintenance and capital dollars. So oftentimes folks are saying we need funds to build new buildings, make sure that we bring them up to standards with other districts, but it's not solely about capital funding. It is about capital and maintenance, because when we receive those buildings, we want and need to be able to maintain them for the life cycle of that building.
Ms. Romo, I hate to cut you off, but for the sake of time, if you could start wrapping up and finish by 11:30, just for any questions from the commissioners. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I actually don't need to go through these next ones in details. This particular slide just talks about the actions that we have taken internally to address the gap. So even though we have gap in our budget, there are still things that we are able to do in order to improve our efficiency and give the best maintenance program we can to our buildings. This next slide goes through the impacts that remain if we continue to have the gaps in our budget. I mean, there's just not much that we can do if we don't have additional funding. And this is a nationwide crisis. This is just not unique to our building operations here. And then this final slide, and again, I don't have to read it. I won't read it. It simply says, what can we do? What is the shared responsibility in getting this message out and in maintaining our buildings? And we just call out specific groups, what city schools can do, what we're asking the Board of Commissioners to do, what lawmakers and community leaders can also do. And then this final slide, I said a whole lot. What this does, it basically summarizes each of the sections that I went through. It gives a high-level summary so that folks can quickly go to this slide and see what it is we had to say. And that is the end of the annual CMP presentation. Questions? I will stop presenting now.
Thank you so much, Ms. Romo. For the sake of time, are there any pressing questions? Commissioner Reed.
I can probably send my questions to staff, but I guess can you send me a copy of, hopefully you have something written. You talked about the guiding principles, and you also talked about the planned strategic actions. Do you guys have like a business plan or development plan that you have that delineated where I could understand it a little deeper dive?
Yes, we have it highlighted in our CMP, and we can make sure that the details in that are enough to share. Yes.
Yeah, because I need to know your visionary thinking in terms of what you're doing. And I guess one quick question, I'll send the others, but one quick question. I looked at the appendix, and I think the appendix is really good. People should read it. But looking at the appendix, how much does it benefit the system to some way get these unused, abandoned buildings offline quickly? Because you talked about reactionary and preventive maintenance. If you get these offline quickly, what does that do in terms of your cost basis?
I believe that it will reduce a lot of our, I won't say a lot. I can't quantify it at the moment, but it would at least reduce our HVAC cost and some of our energy costs that are associated with those buildings. I don't know what the impact would be without doing the analysis, but up at the top of my head, I can think of those three things that would be impacted.
Also mentioned vandalism. So it's like, that's another thing you have to deal with those buildings. So because they're just sitting there, and I guess the city owns them now, I think, if you don't use them, right? So how can we give them back to the city sooner?
So Nicole Stewart has really worked on a process we transfer those buildings quite, it's pretty efficient. So Nicole, you should add, Dr. Stewart, you should add in if there's anything I'm forgetting. We do transfer, once we're done using them for an educational purpose, we do surplus them to the city, and it is pretty quick. And it does have some impact on the overall cost of our portfolio. I think part of the challenge is, it's funny, I had coffee with a former board member this weekend and asked a very similar question. I think part of the challenge is the gap is so large that the impact of closing a few buildings is, it does reduce the size of the gap, but it's just the gap is the chasm is so large that it's a fairly small impact. Nicole?
And I just add that our process, we've worked with both DGS and the real estate office at the city to improve the process of us being able to get the buildings that we are surplusing back to the city through all the approvals and final transfer of buildings by the Board of Estimates relatively quickly. Within 6 to 9 months, we're moving forward with that formal surplus. But in addition, what we're doing is once if there's a school occupying the building, once they're gone, we're also transferring keys much earlier than that formal process and switching over the responsibility of maintaining the buildings for safety, et cetera, to DGS or housing or real estate or whomever is now the responsible party.
Thank you.
Commissioner Bondima? Nothing? No questions?
No questions, thank you.
Okay, got it. Thank you so much, Ms. Romo, for your presentation, and for Ms. Perkins-Cohen and Dr. Stewart for your contributions. We can move on to the Minority and Women Business Enterprise update.
Hi, Commissioners. Josh Sivan, Chief Legal Officer, and I'm here with our team, our Director of Fair Practices, Jane Ehrenfeld, our WBE consultant, Mike Smith, and our Fair Practices analyst, Gary Atkinson. And I am going to share my screen. I'm not sure why it went to the last one, but I'll get back up to the first one. Okay. So this is an update on the MWBE program for the past school year, fiscal year. And just to give us background, are the slides advancing for everybody?
I see them, Chief Seven.
Yeah.
Okay, great. The program's mission overall is a commitment to encouraging equitable participation by minority and women business enterprises. We've clarified this, or we're in the process of clarifying the mission as part of the revisions that the policy committee is working on to our procurement policy and regulation, which will come for a first reader shortly. We have also emphasized the alignment with policy ADA, or equity policy, to ensure that purchasing and procurement practices provide access and economic opportunities within communities represented by students of color. One piece just also from background is that under the law, the evidence, there needs to be an evidentiary record to support a program like this. And we do what's called a disparity study. And these are just some highlights from our disparity study that consistently, those disparity studies have found that business discrimination against MWBEs in our market area. And that's why affirmative intervention is needed to dismantle the vestiges of private sector system of racial discrimination. And that's the sort of undergirding of this program. So there are two separate sets of rules that govern our program. One is for state-funded capital projects, which are the facility renovations and construction funded by the IAC. This is all background, but we just wanted to set it up there. So these are the distinctions between the two programs. And the other one is for procurements not through that state-funded program. And those are governed by the rules set forth in the city's code, as well as our own administrative regulation. There are overall goals for each of these programs, and there are certification processes for each of these programs that differ. So again, just as background, for each procurement, we start off with a goal setting process. And this is an overview about how we do the goal setting process, looking particularly at the contract and the number of certified MWBEs in the field that could potentially do the work. And then we work on from there for both goals and sub-goals. There are, under our rules and generally under the state's program, some exemptions that can apply. They're not automatic exemptions, but they require determination by the MWBE unit and the director of procurement that as to whether the rules will apply. And this is important, and we'll come back to this, but just briefly, this is for the what are called intergovernmental cooperative purchasing, which we commonly know as piggybacking, as well as sole source, emergency, instructional materials, and a couple other strategies. We are planning, as part of that regulation, to clarify sometimes a misperception that these are automatic exemptions. But what's really important here is that sometimes these procurements won't be appropriate for MWB requirements, but that should be a reasoned and considered choice. There are also waivers that can be granted if the prime contractor makes a good faith effort to identify subcontractors, but is unable to do so. And that waiver is reviewed closely by our office. So once the goals are set, there is a set of compliance steps that we undertake to review each bid package submitted to determine whether it complies. Then each time a prime contractor submits for payment, we have to review those. We also will engage in audits if there's concern about compliance, as well as complaint investigations. And there are significant remedies as part of the contract process for non-compliance that range from withholding of funds to liquidated damages, and our regulations specifically set forth liquidated damages. Overview. And then the next set of slides show program data for the past year, which, as the prior presentations have explained, has been a year like no other. And there's some interesting patterns in our MWBE program, which we've pursued with the increased volume and often the speed with which we've gone through our procurements. So this slide shows, and I'm not going to go into detail, but I'll just do some highlights on these slides, which are available for review. So about 109 contracts through both programs were reviewed for goal setting by our office, and the overall percentage of MWBE, WBE goals set on those were around 36%, and you can see those figures here and details on those, both broken out for state-funded and other city schools funded programs. Then digging into the state-funded projects, this slide shows the 23 projects on which goals were set and the value of the project dollars, as well as the MWBEs, and then the specific designation of the certified subcontractors and primes participating in that work. And for the city schools funded programs, 86 contracts here. And then the next two slides are important slides. They show what the goal was set at, what the achievement of the goal was, and then the differences for the city schools funded programs. So it shows that we are hitting the goals, basically slight fluctuation up for MBEs, minority business enterprise, and slight downward for MWBEs, but overall hitting the goals that were set. And that's a testament to the vigilance of our unit, but also really the procurement and operations teams, which are working day to day with these contractors and subcontractors. Same analysis for the state-funded programs, showing a above goal for African American minority business enterprises and above goal for other, which includes Hispanic women and Native American. And this slide shows the overall 5-year trend for these programs, showing, and you'll see for FY20, the increase in the number of contracts coming through our office for goal setting, as well as that trend upwards over time, which is important because, as you'll see, a theme here is the more contracts that are coming forward for goal setting, the more value of contract dollars have MWBE goals on them. That's the point that's important for this slide. So what the slides prior and this slide shows is that about 110 million, 111 million dollars of contract awards have MWBE goals set on them. There's another amount which don't have goals set, and so one of the, I think, challenges and the scope of work going forward is to think about some of those exemptions and ways in which we can expand the number of contracts that have goals on them. This slide shows the activities going on in our office. You'll see that there's goal settings, but also a lot of the volume of work is in that compliance work that I mentioned earlier. Finally, we just wanted to benchmark our minority business participation versus the city's program versus the Stadium Authority's 21st Century School programs, and you'll see that where we fit with ours. If you go back, ours was in the 36%, and you'll see the percentages for those other two programs. So compared to those programs, we are doing well in terms of the projects where goals are set. So next steps. One is, and the policy committee is working on revisions to our procurement policy and regulation, which address a lot of the themes that I discussed today. So updated language on the purpose of the program, clarifying that those exemptions that I mentioned are not automatic, clarifying the criteria for goal setting, also adding specific language into the regulation itself on the consequences of non-compliance, and then including provisions with a commitment to robust and dynamic outreach, which we're about to discuss. So currently on the staffing front, we are recruiting, so welcome good ideas for a MWBE manager position, permanent position, as well as a new position for an outreach specialist to help with our outreach effort. Currently, the day-to-day operations are conducted by our MWBE consultant, Mike Smith, who has extensive experience in this area, as well as our other support staff. So with those new staff, once fully staffed, this slide shows what we really want to do to bolster our outreach. And we think that outreach is a clear and important process to expand opportunities to participate and really ultimately to build a pipeline for entrepreneurialism so that city school students have increased opportunities to become the next generation of business leaders in our community. There are other programmatic enhancements that we're looking towards. We've built out our website. We are comparing and benchmarking best practices with other school systems, increasing our collaboration with other public agencies, also looking at and exploring streamlining the certification process so that MWBEs can get in and bid on projects more quickly. Also, as I mentioned above, reviewing our exemption and waiver protocols, especially for piggybacking and for recovery-related procurements to see where we can put goals onto programs, and then looking at other barriers to access for MWBEs. And that's the overview. Open for questions.
Thank you so much for your presentation.
Yeah. Josh, would you mind not sharing your screen? Thank you.
Oh, I didn't know what was going on. Thank you so much for your presentation, Chief Sivan. I see Commissioner Bondima. I think I saw your hand first. So Commissioner Bondima.
Okay, thank you very much. I am very much interested, and I know that we always have the same conversation. There's issues, or my concern is that when we give contracts to companies and organizations, and one of the things that they're supposed to do is give 15% of the contracts to minority organizations. When they do not do that, which I'm sure I know that you follow up, when they do not do that, and we're talking about a lot of money, when they do not submit contracts to minority MWBE, what do you do under those circumstances when you realize that the work has been done, the money's been spent, but it did not go where it was supposed to go?
So that was why I stressed, and we can go back to it. I wanted to put in a slide in there because I know that's a concern, and it's a concern of ours, what the remedies are available. So those range from withholding the contract, disbarring the contractor from continuing to bid on city schools procurements, or liquidated damages, meaning assessing basically damages on the contract. And I think we are working to make sure that we're tighter on that so that we can take steps to consequence, I'll say, businesses that do not perform up to their aspirations.
Well, that is illegal, because when you submit a contract and it's signed and they do not comply with that contract and the money goes somewhere else, then we can file suit to get that money back, can't we?
Yes, and that's why we've actually also put the liquidated damages provision in, because a liquidated damages provision is even more than just a breach of contract, a provision of a contract. And we are taking an additional step as part of the revisions to the regulations to put those liquidated damage provisions into our regulations, so nobody can say that they weren't aware of them or didn't know of them, because they're right there in our regulations. So right, and you and I are on the same wavelength here, that we should be pursuing entities that come into this situation.
And in addition to that, not only is it illegal from our perspective for the city of Baltimore, it's also illegal for the state of Maryland. So I'm sure of that, because if this is going on, the board should want to know the follow-up on this. We should want to know the companies that do not comply with the contract, what happens and what we are doing and carrying it forth. The second thing that I would like to know, and I'm gonna make this brief because we got a shortage of time. I'm always concerned with when we talk about minority contractors and women, and when we talk about, it should be some studies to look at if we're talking about white women or others, because there's situations, and I'll open this up, is that when people submit companies, a lot of the companies are in the wife's name and not in the husband's name, in order to be a part of, and we all know this is not a secret, but it takes away from the other groups of people. And I don't know if you do studies like that. I would hope that you do, in order so you can be alert and aware of what's actually going on out there. But I really, if you could, and I hope this doesn't disappear for me asking the question, if it's any way possible, and it shouldn't take a minute to do this, to find out who exactly are getting these contracts. You know what I'm saying? Because if a company's getting the contract and then there's another group that's not Black or others, or African American others, I would be very interested, because this city of Baltimore is predominantly African American, and we should have African Americans participating more than it. And I'd like you to send, I guess you got it online. We went through that presentation, which was excellent. I need to go through it again, because I was trying to read and break it down, but it went too fast for me. And I need to know the percentages, because when we talk about percentages, I'd like to know numbers. Percentages sounds great, but that means nothing to me. So I like the breakdown of how, who, the numbers. So that's my biggest question. But anyway, thank you. It was an excellent presentation and I really appreciate it. But I'm going to review it. And I know this is going to come up again, but I really would like to get more information. And I want to know more details about what we do and how we file suit against the companies. And we know which companies they are. The companies who are not hiring minority contractors. Okay,
Commissioner Bondima, the point about more information, I definitely take. There was some feedback we should streamline the slides, but I felt it was really important to have all of that information in there, both the numbers and the percentages. I think you're right. And on some projects, we set sub goals. So there's the women-owned businesses are treated separately than the minority business certified. And we've also done, as part of the disparity study we did back in 2014, which we will need to update, we look specifically at women-owned businesses and then minority-owned businesses, recognizing that there can be some overlap, but I think that point is very important, and we can continue to make sure to track that carefully.
Okay, and we will get more information. This just won't go away, right? Okay, thank you so much, Joshua.
Commissioner Reed. Commissioner Reed, you're muted if you're speaking.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. I'm looking at page 14 and page 17, and two things come to mind for me. The first is on page 14, it shows the number of percentage of African-American general contractors. Why is that number so low?
Commissioner Reed, can I tag on to that? Because that's for the state, and then also for the city is 0.8.
Right. It's a low number. Yeah, 0.8. And I guess my other question is, when I look at page 14 and 17, African-American percentage is 14%. We're in a majority African-American city. You go to page 17, and the trend line of African-American businesses vis-a-vis Asian-American, Hispanic-American, and women, all are in the upswing. But I guess the percentage of African-American continues to decrease. So what are we doing? And we talk about mitigation every place else in terms of buildings, and what are we doing in terms of mitigation to ensure that African-Americans are still at the table, or more so at the table than they are right now? Because the trend line doesn't look good in terms of African-American businesses, both as contractors and subcontractors. I just don't like the trend. Thank you.
And I think that's important to note and highlight. And I went quickly on the slides, but I think that's a right point to highlight. I think that is where we hope two ways that we are going to make sure that trend line doesn't continue and ultimately revert us. One is, I think, the importance of the outreach work, and not just outreach as a one-off, but a sustained building relationships and building partnerships. So I think that's critical and what we want to do when fully staffed. I think the second is to really make sure that we're streamlining the certification process. So companies that are minority owned are certified by the city and the state as such, which allows us then to make sure that we are considering them in these programs. The certification processes are processes that are really important for us to work on and make sure that we're addressing barriers to that going forward.
Thank you, Josh.
My one follow-up question is, Chief Sivan, what is the estimated timeline to fully staff the unit and for the other programmatic challenge updates that were listed?
So I'm smiling, Commissioner Roberts, because this has been a priority to me since I've come, and without getting into details of personnel, we have made a number of offers to people who have not accepted the offer. So we are going to continue the diligence there, and the importance, I think, is to really get somebody who can hit the ground running and really support our work. We have an amazing team that's keeping us afloat. But my hope is that, and their hope, believe me, is that we have additional person power to go forward. So I welcome anybody watching, and commissioners, if you have ideas, we would love to have, and that's a huge priority of our office and more generally of the system, to get those positions filled and filled with people who are going to move this work forward and address the really important points we've talked about today.
Thank you so much, Chief Sivan. We are running behind, so we do need to transition to the next presentation. But thank you so much for the Minority and Women Business Enterprise update.
Thank you all.
We can transition to the Built to Learn Act High School Feasibility Study update. My apologies for running behind.
Good morning, commissioners. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay. Good morning. Again, I'm Dorothy Hellman. I'm the Executive Director for the 21st Century Program. I will be doing presentation on the feasibility studies this morning. I do have on the line with me Michael McBride, our Director of Design, and I also have Renee Stainrod, our Manager of Community Relations. So just a little bit of a recap of how the high school program kind of got prioritized is back in 2019, city schools pivoted from the 10-year plan, the Plan Year 3 schools, to concentrate on renovating high schools. At the time of that reporting, only 16 of 36 schools were in good shape to average condition. Most have aging infrastructure. The cost of renovations at the time were 3 to 4 times more than an elementary or middle school. And in addition to that, underutilized spaces, under 60%, do not receive approval for state CIP funds. And I think the ops team mentioned that earlier. So what do? Well, HB1, known as the Built to Learn Act, that was targeted for the high school program since it would provide approximately $400 million in funds. In January of 2020, you, the Board of Commissioners, approved 8 high schools, of which 5 were selected for detailed studies. We limited it to 5 because we wanted to set the expectation of what could realistically be built with the funds received. So those schools included Frederick Douglass, which would have Joseph C. Briscoe co-locate on their campus. There was City College High, there's Poly and Western on a single campus, and the 2 that were placed on hold were Vivian T, which was scheduled to be co-located with BDJ, and Edmondson Westside. Feasibility studies began in 2020, and they were substantially complete in June of this year. So with the studies almost complete, the process under the 21st Century MOU is to submit EAP packages, right? We submit these to you, the board, for approval, and these comprise of 3 documents: the board or the project summary, we seem to call it, the city schools ed specs, and of course the architect's feasibility study. So each school was consolidated. All the documents were consolidated as an individual packet. Some of these, of course, were really quite large, a few hundred pages, but that's how detailed the studies were. The rest of this presentation today is really just a high-level summary of what was included in each of those packets that were submitted to you. So starting with Frederick Douglass, with Joseph C. Briscoe co-located on their campus. Where student enrollment is concerned, Frederick Douglass is currently at 800 students. The new renovation would accommodate approximately 1,058 students. Briscoe's current enrollment is approximately 57 students, and the new plan will accommodate approximately 110 students. The IAC, which is the Interagency Commission, that is the state, we do have consensus or approval on the final student enrollment, and that was through legislative action. However, the gross area baseline consensus, that one is pending. And if you ask what that is, it's really a formula that's kind of used by the state to confirm funding. They align enrollment with the overall building size, and this is where they determine how much funds that we are to receive. So that's still pending for this project. Facility condition highlights. Douglass was originally built in 1927, so it's really a bit of an older building. It is not on the historic register, but it was designated a landmark in 2012. So the Baltimore City Historical and the Architectural Preservation Office, and going forward, I'm just going to call it CHAP, they will have some oversight of this project to ensure that the historic components of the buildings are preserved. Other deficiencies to point out, and I'm just going to do highlights because the rest can be read, is the site lacks an extensive stormwater system for water runoff. That's important. The building lacks ADA compliance, which is the Americans with Disabilities Act. The exterior facade leaks or requires repair, waterproofing. That can also create conditions of mold. Where infrastructure is concerned, the building needs a complete gut. Air conditioning is present in portions of the building, but it dates back to 1983, and it exceeds life expectancy. If you're asking me what life expectancy is, for some components, it can be 15, it can be 20, it can be 30 years. Obviously, it's beyond its useful life. The electrical equipment is past its useful life. Fire alarm equipment is beyond its useful life. The AT and the IT, informational technology, AV, audiovisual systems are in fair but outdated conditions. Few rooms meet the standards for lighting, security, and HVAC, right? So in 2019, the facilities team noted that to update the HVAC and just the fire alarm sprinkler in the building, it would cost $24 million. Summary highlights. Community highlights. We include community in all our feasibility studies. None of our projects proceed without community participation. This includes a minimum of 3 meetings. For Frederick Douglass and for Briscoe, we had attendees from elected officials, alumni. These included State Senator Hayes, delegates Amphrey, Conway Jr., Wells, City Council, I believe, Torrance, Foreman, Douglass alumni presidents, and also the school principals. We also had City Council member Eric Costello, and of course, principal of Briscoe, which is Tamika Daniels. Major concerns, feedback. That's always very important. I only listed just the top 3. Having Briscoe co-locate on the Douglass campus, quite frankly, it created a little bit of an angst with the Frederick Douglass alumni at first. That's not an understatement. They really wanted to preserve their individual history, but through design and some one-on-one meetings, we were able to quiet their concerns and to focus on the greater good for all the students. Their second major concern was campus security for students and staff. Students use public transportation to get to and from school, mainly using the MTA bus stop at Mondawmin Station, in addition to the Metro subway station. Further to that, the shopping center is an issue, right? Residents walk through the campus to access the center. And the last one is a community access to the track and fields for health, wellness, and recreation. We're trying to get some delineation from that to ensure that a lot of the sporting events are actually protected and kind of held close to the students who need it. But in addition to that, not all of it are actually held in compliance with the ADA. So where design summary is concerned for Frederick Douglass and for Briscoe. As part of the feasibility studies, the design team looked at 3 basic options, and this is normally that's what came out of the MOU, right? So I'm just going to give a little bit of a definition, but then going forward, I won't give the definitions again, but it's 3 options. Strategic renovation. This means that we minimally reconfigure the interior walls and we focus on systemic HVAC, mechanical systems, plumbing systems. We upgrade them all. For option 2, which is your renovation modernization, this includes reconfiguration of interior non-structural walls, and we kind of do this to best accommodate the systems and the program. The third, which is normally the most expensive, is a modernization with addition. It's pretty close to an internal gut or a new building in some cases, and the addition is normally made to meet square foot program requirements if unable to do so within the basic footprint of the building. So based on the 3 test fit plans, option 2 was recommended as the one that best met the ed specs. For that option, it actually allowed for the demo and new building and new build out of the ROTC wing for Briscoe, which includes a new administrative suite and a gymnasium. This one is above ground and not in the basement, as with the strategic renovation. The design allowed Briscoe to have a separate entrance from Warwick Avenue, and the interior layout also afforded both programs to be continuous together but separate. and with only the kitchen being shared. The probable cost for this option is $117 million. The budget is going to be broken down in a future slide, so we can get to talk about money later. On to the next project, City College. Their current student enrollment is 1,402 students. The new renovation will accommodate approximately 1,998 students, and that's our test fit plans. IAC consensus was achieved for both the student enrollment and the gross area baseline on this project. So we anticipate the project will be fully funded when submitted to the IAC. Facility condition highlights. So City College was originally built somewhere in the window of 1926 to 1928. It depends on the documents that you're kind of looking at. Regardless, it's an older building. It was placed on the National Register of Historic Places in 2003. In 2007, it was listed as a city landmark, so the building's exterior cannot be altered without approval of CHAP. The challenges at the school and the site are many. First and foremost, the school has to be approached as a restoration project first. Pure and simple. This is very different from the other schools. Secondly, the site is constrained. It's on a steep grade. It's on top of a hill. The building, the annex, and the site, it lacks ADA compliance. The brick and the stone exterior of the building leaks and requires repair and waterproofing. A separate report was provided in your packet for that. The site lacks major stormwater facilities. We have complaints of water icing at the bottom of the road during winter. The majority of the ventilation appear to be original to the building, and they're in various stages of kind of disrepair. Most of the electrical equipment is past its useful life. Plumbing fixtures, floor drains, and are in multi-stages of disrepair, and the building is unsprinklered. In 2019, the facilities team noted that to update the HVAC, the roof, the elevator, the building envelope, and the fire alarm sprinkler systems, the cost would have been $42 million alone. Summary highlights. Community. As with Douglas, City College also received the benefit of community participation, which includes a minimum of 3 meetings. The attendees of this included State Senator Mary L. Washington, State Delegates Anderson, Boyce, McIntosh, City Council Ramos, alumni presidents, Robert Ford, Foundation President Bob Manikin. We had Chum, Mark Washington, of course, Cindy Harcum, our school principal. Their major feedback and concerns: the use of the annex building and providing access and suitable spaces for the Chum Association. They also wanted their building to be preserved. That was very important. Also, there was pedestrian, vehicular, and parking concerns. All right. So design overview. As part of the feasibility study, again, we looked at 3 basic options. We looked at strategic, we looked at renovation, modernization, and we looked at a modernization with addition. Based on the 3 test fit plans, option 2 was recommended as the one that best met the ed specs. So this option kind of allows for the program to remain within the footprint of the main building and the annex. The annex is renovated to include both community and student sport spaces. A small addition was added to provide ADA access between the gym and the lower level of the school. A retaining wall would be built to allow for the land to be graded and accommodate 2 relocated softball fields. This then makes the way for proposed new road access with entrance from Lock Raven Boulevard to the Alameda, thereby improving pedestrian and vehicular site circulation. The probable cost for this option, $194 million. Keep in mind, this is a restoration project. I also wanted to point out something a little bit special about this budget, this estimate rather. Page 36, if you're ever scrolling through those documents, this architect study has the most comprehensive budget. What is shown on page 1 of the EAP, that summary sheet that I submitted, is actually what's on the last page. It's the only project that has both numbers kind of in sync. The other projects like Douglas and Poly Western, it didn't include some of these costs. And so to create a balanced budget, which is what we're going to review at the end of it, the categories were supplemented with these missing costs, FF&E, IT, design and construction contingencies to make sure that the estimates were more complete for this review. On to Baltimore, Poly and Western. Poly's enrollment is currently at 1,619 approximately students. The renovation will accommodate 1,942 students. Western High, all-girl school. I also attended an all-girl high school too. Current enrollment is 1,236. The proposed renovation will accommodate 1,488 students. IC consensus is pending on the student enrollment and gross area baseline for both these schools. Facility condition highlights. So Poly Western was originally built in the window of 1964 to 1968. I say these dates because sometimes, again, the documents kind of differ. Regardless, it's an older building, but it's not considered historic. However, they do house memorials indicative of a rich heritage, and that requires preservation. The challenges at the campus is different from the others. Both buildings are larger in size than the target square foot of the ed specs. Both schools have an excess of together 207,000 square feet, most of which is on the Poly side. Both have large amounts of unusable square feet in crawl space in the lower area, especially Western. Both buildings share mechanical systems, roof, auditorium, swimming pool, and gym. Other challenges include pedestrian and vehicular access. That one is a major concern on and off campus. Students cross major thoroughfare I-83 and Cold Spring Lane to access school and public transit stops. The site has poor infiltration, stormwater management definitely needed. The solid masonry, nice exterior walls were built without a cavity, an air cavity, a water barrier, or insulation. So does not meet standards. Most classroom entries and restrooms are not ADA compliant. There's no water filtration in the buildings. The building lacks ample cooling. Some systems are original to the building and exceeds useful life. The electrical distribution is beyond useful life, and the manufacturer is no longer in business. IT AV systems are in fair but outdated condition. The rooms are in need of air conditioning in most cases. Again, back in 2019, the facilities team noted that to update the HVAC and fire alarm sprinkler system, that cost would be around $32 million.
Ms. Hellman,
Yes.
I will cut you off, but for the sake of time, I need you to start wrapping up around 12:15.
Okay, awesome. Summary highlights, major feedback. Again, we had, in this one, we only had one community meeting. Didn't have much of a choice on that one because we're trying to move this project forward. Major feedback concerns the need for safe pedestrian and vehicular access. There's major concern for students accessing the light rail via Cold Spring Lane. We needed to provide a space for Poly and Western, marching band, and of course, an ROTC program wing. So this is where it gets a little bit interesting. This is the budget estimates. As mentioned, City College was the only budget that included the distinct line items. We actually included these line items in the budgets for Frederick Douglass and Poly. That said, I also deliberately did not include the 3%, normally a 3 to 5% markup for the change order contingency. I think MSA has a 3% markup that we're kind of running on the current 21st century program. Once we get to the next level of pricing, then that number will be included. So that said, the chart shows the categories and the overall estimates of the project. Douglas, 117 million, City, 194 million, and Poly Western, $269 million. Total, $580 million. I wanted to point out just a few other things because I know pricing is very important. These estimates are showing premium pricing, right? And these are based on current commodities market. In some cases, we have the steel mills back in April. those prices are up 39.5% year over year. Curtain wall, 10%, drywall, 20%, roofing, 7 to 10%. We do have escalation of $61 million built in, and that's 4% a year until the contracts are bought out, but there's still a deficit. Where current project funding sources are concerned, under the Build to Learn Act, $355 million. We were hoping to have $400 million. However, that was reduced because we had to take some deductions for PG County, debt service, and some money set aside for the Choice program. 21st Century Project savings also got reduced from $60 million to $20 million because there were some other things we had to pay for. The legislative action for the $3 million for City College only, that is intact, as is the local match. Again, our total is $402 million. Potential funding sources, we're looking at ESSER funding, some of our MEP systems, any new legislative actions that we can submit. Alumni fundraising, we got great feedback on that from the City College alumni, and other public-private partnerships we're looking at in the future. So this is the last slide that I wanted to review, and we can just kind of land there. The presentation and the handouts, I know that they're obviously a lot to take in, but one thing we do need to do is to maintain a pace for the program, because this program has to align with the end of the 21st century program. What we're trying not to do is to have any gaps, which can lead to a lack of institutional, or loss rather, of institutional knowledge, both on the MSc and the 21st century team. That said, we do have some action items, which includes obtaining your approval of the 3 EAPs, which include the new greenfield option for Poly Western. I didn't talk about it because I was kind of rushing through it. But if you look at the cost of $268 million, one of the things we wanted to do was to look at an alternative option, which is a brand new state-of-the-art facility on that greenfield. And we can talk about that in Q&A. I'm just trying to get through. We do have to obtain full consensus for the IAC. We need to complete the MOU agreement, and of course to confirm financing for the program. Lastly, where you see that little check mark for the enhanced approval project, my request to you today is very simple. For today and for the public board meeting next week, what we're asking for, which is very different from all the EAPs before, we're asking for a conditional approval. This provides us time to perform additional work, and it keeps the project on schedule. So I can actually take questions at this point. But the important thing is to get approval, to obtain approval.
Commissioner Bondrima,
in the interest of time, I can send my questions. Okay.
Commissioner Reed.
Just one quick one. With Frederick Douglass, your capacity utilization floor is 60%. Frederick Douglass is about 62%. Does that concern you?
Can you repeat the question for me, please?
Okay, you have a floor of capacity utilization at 60% in terms of the buildings.
Yes.
Frederick Douglass, I see the number for Frederick Douglass is about 62%. And Briscoe only has like 55 kids.
Right.
Does that concern you in terms of the ability to get the full utilization you can for that complex?
Actually, no, because the operational team has been working on the Office of New Initiatives. They're actually projecting that new students will be added to the school.
Thank you. I'm done, Madam Chair.
Okay.
Thank you so much for the presentation, Ms. Hellman. For the sake of time, we are going to transition to procurement, and also as a matter of
Madam, does she need a vote from us to send it to?
No, we just got it first. We'll see it again for our next, I believe, our next public meeting, our next general meeting.
Okay, that's when we vote. Okay, thank you.
So can I just make a clarification again,
Yes.
because of timing? The goal was to have this, however, have conditional approval, not final approval, and to potentially have a vote by the Board of Commissioners next week, which then actually gives us approval to proceed into design and also to reach out to the IAC to ensure that we're fully funded and that we're in queue to receive funds. That is very important to maintain the trajectory of this program. We rushed it in the last minute, but I do want to make sure that that is understood.
So we'll be bringing it to the full committee, to the full board next week. And the conditional approval that Dorothy's referring to means that we would come back at 50% design development to check in with you. It's that gap between the cost of these programs versus the amount of resources we have. So that will give us time to look at if there are cost saving measures we could put in place to reduce the cost of these projects, as well as, frankly, it'll give us another legislative session to see if there's additional resources we could identify because the gap is so large. But we normally we can't really explore some of those cost saving measures without ability to design. So we kind of need that initial approval next week.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
We are going to transition to procurement. And for a matter of record, we do not have anyone here for public comment today. Good afternoon, Ms. Wilson.
Good afternoon. We have 12 items on the agenda today. The first item is Loyola University of Maryland. This is a $50,000 contract for running the facilities in order to run the summer graduation program this Saturday. I think it's Saturday, the 22nd. This was an item that was, provided a little bit later than usual as we were going through this process of ensuring having a graduation for all of our summer school graduates this year. It is both here for operations for questions, and you'll see it again in the special session that happens right after this operations meeting.
So really quickly, Ms. Wilson, just because for the sake of time, we were going to pull 12.1 anyway, but I would ask that my colleagues, if there are particular procurements that you want to pull, to just name those instead of us going through the list like we typically do. So for 12.1, I do know that the full committee would like someone to speak to this particular contract, more so for the matter of having it on record is why we are using this facility as opposed to the vendor, the setup that we used in June for the full commencement exercises.
This is Bundima. Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Make a comment?
Yeah, yes. In addition to what I said.
This is just, and I'm sure we're going to have this discussion later. I have lots of questions in reference to this one. So are we holding, oh shoot. Are we holding those questions till later?
No, it's now. It's now.
I have a big question in reference to that. First of all, I don't know why it's here. I don't understand when everything is done and here we are to the board while we are asking, why wasn't this brought before the board in an earlier time? And plus, I don't understand. I have a lot of questions about this, but we're not voting on this right now.
We are not. It's Q&A right now.
That's okay.
But our special meeting that will follow this meeting at 12:30 is for this particular item. So if you
okay, so I'll deal with that at the special meeting.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Commissioner Reed.
I'm fine. I just have a general question. I don't have any questions, specific items. So I just a general question in terms of, we normally get contracts. We have the contract plus a 10% overage that allows us for slippage or whatever. So when I'm seeing a lot of contracts today where we're asking for incremental money. Why hasn't that incremental been taken care of in the original contract? Thank you.
Was there a particular one that you wanted to highlight?
No, it was like 3 contracts that said we want more money because we have to do more. And it's just a generic question in terms of when we do the original contract, we do a 10% VIG, and are we going through the VIG and need more money, or How do we deal with those contracts? I mean, a contract's a contract.
So I will answer generally, and then I think Cindy Smith is available as well if there's some specifics. The items that you're referring to are all addressing unforeseen conditions or overages that were related to something that wasn't included in that original contract for a variety of reasons. So you're right, there's always a 10% contingency to deal with certain items, but for some of these, it exceeds that due to things that were discovered as they started doing the work. The pipe example that's in this current agenda is a great example of that. They bid on a particular type of project. When they got in there and started pulling off the insulation, they realized that all the pipes had to be replaced. That wasn't part of the original scope.
And yes, we've actually already used then the contingency. So the contingency portion is used, and then this is in addition to the contingency. This is Cindy Smith, Director of Design and Construction. Sorry.
Okay, Cindy. Okay, thank you.
So circling back, I did have a question about 12.1. It was more of an information question. Should I re-ask the question, Ms.
No,
Wilson?
would you just like me to provide a little bit more context? Is that
Yeah.
all right? Okay, so again, I'm Rachel Pfeiffer. I'm the Executive Director of College and Career Readiness. So we were, after the June graduations, which we held at the Poly Western Athletic Complex, we were looking for a vendor for our summer graduation, which typically has been held indoors at one of our high schools. But of course, in the midst of the pandemic, we wanted to be able to hold it outside and, in a socially distanced way. And so as a result, we had been talking with the vendor that we use for the June graduations. We paid about $171,000 for the 8 days of 26 graduations with that vendor, and we thought it would be significantly less for 1 day, 2 graduations, or 2 different periods of time for graduation. What we discovered was that vendor came in at $150,000, which was significantly more than we anticipated, and more than we had budgeted. And so what we did was we reached out to other colleges around the city, or 2 colleges around the city, to see what we might be able to find in terms of another location. We heard back from Notre Dame of Maryland and Loyola. Ultimately, Loyola came in at $50,000, which was within our budget. It took a little bit longer for us to hear from them and to actually be able to get a quote from them just because of summer travel with their staff. But once we did get that $50,000 amount, we hope to be able to move forward with that rather than go over budget, to cover summer graduation.
I'm sorry to jump in there, Commissioner Roberts. Can I ask a question real quick? Because I know we're behind.
Sure.
And I had to step away from the computer for emergency purpose, but I didn't hear Dr. Pfeiffer's everything. But my question, I'm kind of confused, Dr. Pfeiffer. Am I behind times? When have we started giving graduations to summer school students? Is that a new thing?
Dr. Brandema, that's a great question, and I can only speak for my time here. I came here in August of 2017, and we held a summer graduation that year. I don't believe it was new at that point, but I can't tell you exactly when it started. I can follow up with that information.
Yeah, because in the interest of time, also about money, but the money and all of the 500 students going to Loyola with parking and all of that going on. And the money, because we are so short of money in so many different areas, needing resources, I'm not understanding. And also, why wasn't the board notified? And here it is right now, making a decision when everything has been planned, parents have been notified, and here, what am I here for?
Understood. So
I don't know why I'm here.
On the latter part, let me be clear. We should not have gone ahead. We should have waited for the board to before we sent out what was a tentative location. So I apologize for that. We will not do that. We were receiving a lot of questions from families, and so we had a backup plan. If the board did not approve, we would have held the graduation inside at one of our high schools, but we would not have been able to allow the students to have guests. So we wanted to be able to have a place where students could have guests and do it safely, which is why the outdoor location was preferable. To your first question, having a summer graduation is a really significant incentive for our young people, particularly this year, but really for all the years when students persist and really overcome challenges that have prevented them from being able to graduate in June. The opportunity to walk across the stage and graduate after they finish their academic work is, from my perspective, worth the $50,000 that it will cost in this case. Typically, it actually doesn't cost very much at all because we're doing it indoors. It's a little bit more this year because we needed to find another venue. But it is a pretty significant milestone for our young people. We actually hold a winter graduation as well. And we found that giving students the opportunity to celebrate just after they have finished completing their work is really significant for our young people. So that's why we hold it. And again, this year is just a little bit different because of the health and safety conditions.
Well, I'm going to end it with saying I'm really a little bit offended that we're getting this right now, and as if the board didn't matter, because we should have heard about it. We get calls about things like this, and we can't answer the questions. And it puts us in a terrible situation. You understand that you guys do wonderful work, but it puts us in an awful situation when people say, you don't know this? No, and all the plans have been made and the board was not included as far as I know.
So I apologize for that. I will say that the plan just got the it was down to the wire process. So the notification came as soon as we could get the documents together and over to you.
Okay, so we need to actually wrap this meeting because we have our special meeting in regards to this special procurement, this 12.1 Loyola University, Maryland. And so we can continue this conversation, but in our special meeting. So we are going to wrap today's Operations Committee meeting. Thank you everyone for attending. We look forward to seeing you at next month's Operations Committee meeting. But for now, I need everyone that should be attending the special meeting on this procurement to log off and hop on to the link for the special meeting. See you in a bit.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Pfeiffer.
Happy to answer more questions.
Thank you.